Welcome to In the Telling. My name is Stephen.
And I'm Miranda, and we are the co-founders of the Nomadic Archivist Project.
And in our first episode, I talked a little bit about my mother and the kind of research that I'm doing on her. We thought for the second episode, we would talk with Miranda about a relative. And to kind of give our conversation some context of Miranda, I want to find out a little bit about how you got started in genealogy research.
I've come from a very long line of genealogists. Mm-hmm. My mother, most directly, who has been doing this work for over 40 years, and her grandfather, picking up where her grandfather left off on one of her family lines, the Stillwell line. Mm-hmm. And so I've grown up in this wonderful house with a lot of stories, with a lot of research, looking at different historical records, mm-hmm. and going to different historical sites, mm-hmm. To really start thinking about putting the pieces together. Mm-hmm. We always have like bits and pieces, sort of what you talked about in when you were talking about Elaine, mm-hmm. and just hearing stories or being able to find a document here, mm-hmm. or a newspaper clipping here, and there's all these disparate mm-hmm. narratives that you're trying to piece together. And so I sort of learned how to do a lot of this work and sort of learned some of the difficulties and just mm-hmm. the fascination around thinking about family stories and how they relate to us now and how they relate to who I am, thinking right. about the past. From growing up in a house with my mother, who is a genealogist.
Do you remember the first time you went with your mom or became aware of genealogy research, like that it was a thing? Because your mom was interested and she got it from her father, correct?
Her grandfather. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I remember a lot of times, but I mean, for the most part, she dragged me to different places. Mm-hmm, she would drag mm-hmm. me to the cemetery, or she would drag me to the library because I was a child, and research is hard and tedious.
Yes.
And you don't really understand it at that point. But mm-hmm. And I always just thought it was weird that we were always going to the cemetery and looking at headstones.
So about what age were you think?
I don't remember my first, but I would say like 10, 11.
10 or 11. And so that's when you were being taken to these places to do research. But when did it arrive in your head that it had meaning? In that, you're like, oh, my mom is doing this work because she's trying to figure out this, that, and the other about a particular relative.
I don't think it had the type of meaning that it has for me now until I was an adult.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think through my teenage years and probably early 20s, mm-hmm. it didn't have the same meaning. But then when I started to, especially when I started to lose people, mm-hmm. Family members, when I lost my grandmother, when I lost one of my great aunts, mm-hmm. And feeling like I wanted to know more about them, connect with them, I missed them, mm-hmm. And I wanted to know who they were. Growing up with them as mm-hmm. a child, you see one aspect of who somebody is, mm-hmm. and you don't get the full picture. Mm-hmm. And after somebody's gone, you just keep thinking about them. You wonder about them. And I think after I started losing some really important people in my life, then I started to think about the past in a different way. And mm-hmm. I started to do oral histories on my father's mother, okay. Fannie Bowen. Mm-hmm. She was a very quiet woman, and I wanted to know more about who she was. And she mm-hmm. wasn't an outward woman. She didn't have diaries. She didn't have letters.
Okay.
So I went to, I have 10 aunts and uncles. She had 10 kids. Mm-hmm. And I took oral histories from mm-hmm. most of them, okay. did oral histories with most of her children to just get a better understanding of who Fannie Pearl was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because everybody remembers her differently and everyone has
Of
different
course,
experiences with her
Mm-hmm.
depending on the time period or where they were living,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was down south or in
The
upstate New
relationship
York.
with her.
Yeah, so at that point, in my mid-20s is when I really started to get more interested and involved in this work.
So I know that you're continuing to follow your grandmother's story. What are you working on now, though? I'm curious.
So I've sort of taken a break from looking or thinking about my father's mother's story, as well as for a long time, I've been working on my mother's story.
Oh, okay.
And I've been very fortunate with her because she kept a lot of letters. She kept a lot of not journals, but writings.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been wonderful to sort of piece together her life and think about things that she went through. But I've taken a break from both of my grandmothers.
Okay.
And it sort of happened this summer, actually. I took a trip with my partner we drove throughout the South. We went through Tennessee and Mississippi, Alabama and Louisiana. And through our sort of tour, I ended up at my uncle's house. And this is one uncle that has been working a lot with my mother on different genealogical projects.
Okay.
And he reminded me of a story of my great grandfather, John Mims, and the mystery around his disappearance.
Okay.
And so that, of course, because I'm a very curious person and I do not have a one-track mind. I'm constantly all over the place with my research and thinking about the people in my past whose story is still somewhat unknown and really, I mean, just thinking about his disappearance and that it's been unsolved for almost 100 years because we think he disappeared somewhere around the time of like 1914. We're like putting that as a disappearance because it's my grandfather who was a little boy at the time, and he witnessed his father. He witnessed a couple of white men coming up to their front door and chasing his father through the back, and they never saw him again. And so his memory is sort of what we're going off of. And so not quite sure if he was 7 years old, if he was a little bit older. Right. So we're keeping that window, the date possibilities open as we try to hunt down where John Mims went to. But that's it. That's all we have. So we have my grandfather who really didn't speak about this until later in life. And only when we were starting to think about genealogy, tracing the Mims line, did he start to tell some of these stories about his own father. But it's very strange. John Mims, even before his disappearance, he doesn't really show up on a lot of census records. I mean, it's clear that he was a migrant worker. And so it could have been that he wasn't in the location that he needed to be when the census were being taken. But even as a kid living with his parents, he doesn't really show up. He's like this really mysterious figure, and his death, or his disappearance, is also very mysterious. And we think, he's connected to a murder of a man named Stewart.
Wow.
I'm guessing a white man. But we can't find Stewart either. We can't put any of those pieces together. So since this summer, I've been obsessed with finding John Mims. I really want to understand what happened to him, and I really want to put some closure on his story. Yeah. It's weird, it's a weird time. It's the South. It's Marshall County, Mississippi. My mind goes to a lot of scary places when I'm thinking about what happened to him. You're chased out of your house, never to be seen again. And then, a short amount of time later, his wife, Cornelia, she takes her three children, including my grandfather, and they walk from Marshall County, Mississippi, up to Memphis, Tennessee.
Wow.
In 1919, which is also a very weird period in, Southern history.
Absolutely. Sharecropping, Black laws, sundown towns, quite a bit of things that have impacted the livelihood of Black people.
Yeah. So the fact that she would just pick up and move and
Mm,
leave like that is also very strange. And so there's all these sort of like unsolved um, stories that, and
mhm,
so that's connected to John Mims and his disappearance.
mhm.
And so that's what I've been working on
Okay.
currently.
And what have you found out? Like, I'm kind of curious about the kinds of, other than the oral history from your uncle, what kinds of resources have you used or found about John Mims?
So one of the great things about having a genealogist as a mother is
Mm-hmm.
that I have sort of now roped her into my
Okay.
research, and she's been helping me. And we get together every Thursday night, and we start working on John Mims's
That is the
story.
best thing ever I have ever heard in my life because I love that.
It's been wonderful. And then my uncle, who is in Memphis and is very
Mm-hmm.
close to where our family lived in Marshall County in Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
he's been also doing some of the amazing work in looking for some of our family graves
Okay.
and taking pictures of a lot of these headstones
Mm-hmm.
that have in the summer are typically covered in bush,
Right.
but now that it's been winter, he's been able to actually get up there and document
Wow.
a lot of. And it's a space, it's a area that has no, somebody does own it, but
Mm-hmm.
they haven't been doing anything with it. So,
Okay.
and I haven't disturbed any of the graves yet that we know of. And so he's been doing
Mm-hmm.
that work for
Mm-hmm.
us.
So, what kind of resources did you have you found so far, other than the gravestones, or specifically about John? No, like what kind of resources or evidence of his life, have you guys found so far? What kind of tools are you using?
I love that you say tools, because so we've been doing a lot of the sleuthing that
Mm-hmm.
you normally do, looking through newspapers.
Right.
Of course, since we're from afar, we're looking at whatever's been digitized online.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We've been requesting different death certificates
Mm-hmm.
and birth certificates, marriage certificates,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and thinking about. So I've been thinking big picture. I'm trying to figure out like who. I need to know who John Mims is completely. Like I need to
Mm-hmm.
know who
Yeah.
his parents were, and we haven't been conclusive about that. And so I've been thinking about like who were
Mm-hmm.
the white Mims in
Mm-hmm.
Mississippi, in that area
Right.
of Mississippi. And then trying to trace who um, who John's parents were or grandparents were.
Okay.
Where did they come to Mississippi? Because there was a white Mims
Oh, really?
family
Oh, in that area?
who enslaved many individuals. Yes, in that area. And so,
Okay.
I mean, it makes sense that our family extends from this family, but
Mm-hmm.
um, it's unclear.
Okay.
So we've been doing just like research in that area.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
when you say tools, one of the things that I think is so wonderful about doing this work is that there's always something new that comes up. So
Mm-hmm.
we've been looking for, our family has been looking for John Mims in um, different ways for like 40 years now, let's just say,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
But it wasn't until recently, and I mean like 2 months ago, that
Mm.
there a project, the Reclaim the Records project,
Okay.
um, digitized all the Mississippi death records and put together this index, and it just showed up. And so I told you that my mother and I have been getting together every Thursday. Well, it just showed up one Thursday, and it was all
Wow.
there. And I mean, it was amazing. It was like Christmas.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
so the Reclaim the Records project is a nonprofit activist group of genealogists, historians, researchers, and various government advocates. And they believe that genealogical records should be in the public domain. And so it's been their mission to just go as much as possible and make all of these documents freely accessible.
I agree with them. I think they definitely should be in the public domain. I think everyone should have access to them without having to pay for these public records. Absolutely.
Yes. And so we went through this death index, and we did find a John Mims,
Okay.
and we did write, and we did get the death certificate, but it's not our John Mims.
Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, it was almost perfect. We were like, this has to be our John.
Mm-hmm.
But so, which is fine. It was a little disappointing,
Mm-hmm.
but we're still looking. So there's, we're
Mm-hmm.
using a lot of the normal tools.
Okay. The so earlier you spoke about not having a one-track mind, which I think is really important for a genealogist, for anyone doing this kind of research, because you always have to keep your mind open to different kinds of resources. Other than your uncle telling you about your grandfather and he was 7, about that incident, are there other resources you've been able to locate that kind of give you some semblance of what John might have been like and what he did? Was he a laborer? Was he a farmhand, a sharecropper?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It seems like that he was a sharecropper.
Okay.
And other than that, it's hard to say
Okay.
what, besides like putting the narrative of like what most sharecroppers went through
Mm-hmm.
during that time period. There's nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other traces of John.
Mm-hmm. And you've got
just his children.
And you guys have looked at the Freedmen's Bureau records to see if there's any traces there, or any photographs of John
No,
anywhere.
but there is one of his wife, Cornelia, and she's with a man that we don't know who the man is.
Okay.
It's hard to say. He's younger than her.
Okay.
So it's and I actually have it up in front of my computer. So, because I keep thinking, like, who is this gentleman that Cornelia is with? But yeah, no.
Demonstrably younger. He couldn't have been John in your estimation or your mom's estimation.
I mean, it's possible, but he's in a suit and he's sitting down. It's possible, but it doesn't really add up. And it's later. The picture looks like it's a later time period than the early 1900s.
Okay. Yeah. That's another way to track things. So through the photographic process, because, people of African descent had some photos, and some of them trickled down through the ages and some don't. I've been fortunate to have some of it happen for me, and and I know that your mom has been collecting photographs and digitizing them. You've been digitizing them for a while.
My whole family has been very interested in
awesome both
genealogy. Both sides, meaning my mother and my father's. Well, I meant like my father's family. So my grandmother had children by Ulysses Bowen. And by John Mims. And so there's 10 aunts and uncles for me, 10 children. Okay. And so both of those family lines have been doing a lot of genealogical research.
Awesome.
I think the tools are great. And you were talking about like the different tools that are available and out there. And this is going to come up in a later podcast that we did with Sean Penfone. Yes. And he actually blew my mind with the way that he was thinking about, and he'll discuss this later, but the way that he was sort of approaching looking at census records. Yes. And then, I think it's also the way that we approach research. We sort of, for so long, when I've looked at census records, I'm only looking for my family. Right. And seeing who's in the household, and then
their age, also the descriptive information.
That's it. But I'm not looking at the people who are on the census with them. Right. But those relationships, and they're just people who are in the neighborhood with them, right? In the community with them. Right. And so also thinking about who those people were and the relationship to our families has a lot of meaning. Absolutely. And thinking outside the box. So I also think it's not just the tools that we have, but it's also how we're interrogating those tools.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a great conversation with Sean, and it opened my mind too, because I have a lot of census records, and like you, I would only look at the line, the highlighted line online and go, oh, this is what I'm looking for. And when Sean came up, he talked about that. It is context, and we have to be as imaginative as possible with these records, which may or may not be very descriptive. Right. Yeah. So, I'm intrigued by the specter of John Mims and what you'll be doing with John Mims in the future, in terms of trying to find out more. So, I definitely want to put this out there. If you find out more about him in a future podcast, would you be interested in coming on and talking about him more? About what you found, because in the telling, I think the stories are always evolving. I don't think there's just a story. Earlier on, you said, I think your language was, you wanted to not close a chapter on John, but you wanted to not put it to rest. You wanted to.
Well, I would like some closure.
That's the word, closure.
Because it actually does impact me. Like thinking about, and even though I never met John, and I never met his son, my father's father, my grandfather, he died, I think a little less than 2 months after I was born. So I never got to meet him either. And I can feel that loss. Like, so, you know, being the person that I am and interested in the ways that I'm interested with the past, and thinking about my family. And I mean, I think this is definitely generational. I think this is definitely passed down from my mother. She's always talking to me about the different ancestors that are talking to her.
Correct.
And I can hear them, and I mean, obviously, I don't know what John's fate was, and it could have been, it could have been okay. You know, he could have. My partner thinks maybe he changed his name, and you know, to get away from the law or whatever, and moved somewhere else and lived out his life. I don't know these things. I don't know, but I do know that I don't know, and I would like to see some closure with that. I think it's really important. I've been, you know, I'm an archivist working at the University of Rochester, and we've been really exploring different ways in which to document and preserve activist work and around issues of poverty and homelessness within the Rochester area. So we've been working and talking with a few different organizations, but one is the House of Mercy. And the House of Mercy was started by a woman named Sister Grace. And one of the things, and Rochester also has one, I mean, it's astonishing, one of the highest death rates among especially homeless women or women who've been impacted by homelessness. It's something like crazy around, like the life expectancy is in the early 40s. Wow. And so Sister Grace was explaining to us that, you know, she's buried a lot of people who have come through House of Mercy. House of Mercy doesn't close its doors to anyone. You know, anyone who needs a place to stay can walk in. And one of the things that she has done throughout the years, which is astonishing, is write obituaries for people. Wow. And that is a way for family members who have been missing people, who have been wondering what happened. It's a way, I mean, obvious, you know, it's sad because they passed. But it's a sense of closure, and it's and you're communicating out there with the world what happened. And they were here. And you're documenting that they were real people. They lived on this earth, and now they are gone. And they will be missed. And I haven't found that for John Mims. And so people, you know, like I just think about that just that one wonderful thing that she has done with just writing those obituaries is just so meaningful and so important. And so, yes, I would like closure.
So it's, I just thank you for sharing this wonderful story about how you got into genealogy, how it, you know, how it gives, you know, the work you do meaning. And so we're looking for you, John Mims. You come talk to us, particularly Miranda and her mom. And we're very interested in telling these kinds of stories because they're so common, but they're unique. You know, who's to say if your mom had been a genealogist that you wouldn't have ended up an archivist interested in this kind of storytelling, you know, and story preservation. So that excites me greatly. And it's great working with you to do that kind of work.
Absolutely. So looking forward to also exploring other stories from our various guests, including Christopher Stalling, who will be talking about his experience growing up with two grandmothers in the same house in Harlem, New York. So we're super excited to hear Chris's story.
And we're also looking forward to talking with other folks that we're lining up right now. So if you think you have a story to tell us, you can contact us via Twitter or through our social media, and definitely look at our website, which is Nomadic Archivist. That's archivist as in plural, project.com. Nomadic Archivist Project.com. And we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast today. Thank you so much, Miranda.
Thank you.